She was just 10. Her twin sister clutched her hand, shivering, and their dog, limping through snow, refusing to leave the trail. They didn't know his name. They only knew he was dying, alone, cold and bleeding under a red maple tree. No one heard his call, but Rusty did. What a retired rescue dog and two little girls did next. We'll break your heart and mend it again. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you believe dogs are angels in fur, if you believe courage comes in small boots, hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to hear will stay with you forever. Cedar Hollow was the kind of town that didn't show up on most maps. Tucked deep in the pine-thick forests of western Oregon, the town rested between two forgotten highways and a lake frozen 6 months of the year. In December, it wore silence like a heavy coat, roads blanketed in snow, roofs crusted white, and the air thick with a cold that slipped past scarves and into bones. By mid-afternoon, the sun had already begun its slow retreat behind the ridgeline, leaving behind a pale gray sky bruised with purple. It was under that waning light that 10-year-old Clara Bellamy trudged through the icy path behind their modest cabin, her breath clouding the air like tiny ghosts. Clara was tall for her age, wiry but not fragile, with untamed auburn hair usually braided tight by her mother in the mornings, but now escaping in wild wisps around her cheeks. Her eyes were the color of moss on old woodkeen, observant, and older than they should have been. Beside her, her identical twin sister Ivy looked almost like her reflection, though there was something softer in Ivy's expression, something dreamier. She had a habit of humming songs she never learned and stopping to marvel at frost on a leaf or the way snowflakes landed on her gloves. The two girls wore matching puffy coats, handed down from a neighbor and dyed forest green. Their wool mittens, stitched by their mother in the flickering light of a broken lamp, were mismatched in color but thick enough to fight off the worst of the cold. Ivy held tightly to the leash of the dog that walked ahead of them, ears perked, breath forming in visible huffs. Rusty. He wasn't like the other neighborhood dogs. Rusty was a 6-year-old German shepherd with a black and tan coat peppered with hints of gray, especially around his snout. One ear stood perfectly straight while the other flopped forward slightly, a result of a healed break from years back. He limped ever so slightly on his left hind leg, a remnant from an injury he sustained during a failed training as a search and rescue dog. But the most striking thing about him were his eyes, deep amber, alert, and knowing. They carried a weight, as if Rusty had seen things most dogs weren't meant to. Loretta Bellamy had adopted Rusty 2 winters ago from a shelter outside Portland. Back then, the shelter had called him Maxwell, but when Loretta and the girls brought him home, he refused to respond to the name. One night, while tending the wood stove, Loretta, tired, dusted in flour, and emotionally unraveling, had muttered to herself, "We're all just a bit rusty, aren't we?" The dog, lying curled beside the hearth, had lifted his head at that word. When Clara repeated it gently, "Rusty," he walked to her and placed his paw in her lap. The name stuck, not because it was clever, but because it fit. Rusty was healing, like all of them, slowly and imperfectly. Now, as the snow swirled in lazy spirals around them, Rusty walked with intention. Clara noticed it first. His pace had changed, slower, head lower to the ground, ears twitching. Then came the sound, a low, guttural growl deep in his chest, the kind that vibrated through the leash and sent a shiver up Ivy's arm. "What is it, boy?" Clara whispered. Rusty stopped. He sniffed the air, took 2 steps forward, then yanked the leash hard to the right, toward the deeper part of the Cedar Creek woods, a place their mother had warned them not to go. The trees there grew close together, the light barely filtering through even in summer. In winter, it was a cathedral of shadows. "Should we go back?" Ivy asked, voice barely audible, but Clara's eyes were fixed on Rusty. He stood frozen now, tail stiff, nose pointed forward. Then he let out a sharp bark and pulled again. They followed. The snow here was deeper, sinking into their boots, soaking the tops of their socks. Every step sounded too loud. The cold air burned their lungs. Then, just beyond a cluster of bare birch trees, Clara saw it. A man. He was slumped against the base of a red maple, half covered in snow, his sheriff's deputy badge glinting faintly under the gray light. His uniform was torn at the waist, blood darkening the fabric, spreading into the snow like spilled ink. His face was pale, lips tinged blue, eyes closed. A sidearm lay near his hand, untouched. Clara gasped and dropped to her knees beside him. He's bleeding. Ivy, help me. Ivy trembled but obeyed, pulling off her mittens and offering them to press against the wound. Rusty whined and circled the man before lying down next to him, pressing his warm body against the deputy's legs. "We have to call someone," Clara said. I think there's still a signal near the stream." Ivy fumbled for their old flip phone, its screen cracked and battery low. She turned and sprinted back the way they came, leaving Clara and Rusty with the bleeding man and the growing cold. Far away, inside the drafty wooden cabin lit only by stove glow, Loretta Bellamy stirred a pot of soup made from canned beans and leftover chicken bones. The woodpile was low. The electricity had flickered twice that day, and the sewing machine sat silent, its cord frayed from dampness and time. She glanced at the clock. The girls had been gone too long. Worry crept in, quiet and familiar, like the cold wind beneath the door. The cold deepened in the forest like a tightening vice. Snowflakes grew thicker, no longer gentle. They fell in slants, whipped sideways by gusts that rattled branches above. Clara's fingers, though gloved, had begun to go numb as she knelt beside the fallen officer. She didn't know his name, but the badge on his uniform read Holloway. His breath was shallow, white puffs forming between cracked lips. His blood had soaked into the snow and spread like spilled ink under his hips. The red was so vivid it didn't look real. Her own breath came fast and short, heart pounding against her ribs as if trying to break free. She reached up and unwrapped the thick red wool scarf from her neck hand-knitted by her mother 2 winters ago, still warm with the scent of wood smoke. She hesitated for half a second, then pressed it firmly against the wound on the officer's side. The heat of his blood soaked through quickly. "Stay with us," she whispered, barely audible over the wind. "Please." Beside her, Rusty lay down against the man's legs, his thick fur pressing close. His body trembled slightly from the cold, but he didn't move. He understood somehow. His amber eyes scanned the woods as if expecting something to come from the trees, tail thumping once when Clara met his gaze. Ivy knelt beside them, fumbling with her coat sleeve. With a sudden urgency, she pulled her arm inside her jacket, then her sweater, and tore the inner cotton lining with her teeth. Her eyes welled with tears from the sting of cold on her bare hand. "This'll work," she muttered, voice shaking. Clara took the fabric and wound it tight over the scarf, securing the makeshift bandage. Then came the problem of calling for help. The girls shared a flip phone, an old battered model from their cousin that could barely hold a charge in warm weather. Ivy dug it from her coat pocket. Its screen was cracked, the antenna wobbled, and the signal bar blinked weakly. She stepped back several paces, holding it up, angling it toward the sky. "Come on," she hissed. A single bar flickered. She dialed 911. The call connected, but the sound was garbled. "Hello? Is Ivy Bellamy. We found a man in the woods. He's hurt. Bad." Static. A crackling reply. "Where are you?" "We're in Cedar Creek Woods behind Hollow Ridge Trail near the Maple Grove." More static. Ivy began to cry, voice cracking. "Please, come quick." "Stay put," the operator said. "Help on the way." Then the call dropped. "I think they got it," Ivy whispered. Inside the Bellamy cabin, Loretta was hunched over her sewing machine, mending the hem of a neighbor's slacks, her glasses slipping down her nose. The room smelled faintly of burnt dust and the sour tang of wet wood. She wore 2 sweaters layered over a thermal shirt, her dark brown hair tied into a messy knot. Loretta was 39, but looked older in winter light. Worry had etched soft grooves beside her mouth, and her eyes carried a constant, tired sheen. She'd once dreamed of opening her own tailoring shop, but after her husband left and the pandemic shuttered her first location, she had settled for home jobs and second chances. The sewing machine sputtered and let out a sharp crack. Sparks flared. She yelped and jerked her hand back, clutching her wrist. "Damn it," she muttered, heart racing. Then came the sound of the phone buzzing from the side table. She reached it with a shaking hand, flipped it open. "Hello?" she said. A firm voice answered. "Ma'am, are you Loretta Bellamy, mother of Clara and Ivy?" She froze. "Yes. What happened?" "They called emergency services. They found a man and officer injured in the woods. Your girls administered aid. Medics and deputies are en route." Loretta dropped the phone. It clattered to the floor as she stumbled to the door, flung it open into the cutting wind. She ran down the porch steps in her socks, slipping on a patch of ice and falling hard onto her hip. "No," she breathed, panic clawing at her chest. The cold tore through her clothes as she scrambled to her feet. Her girls, in the woods, in this storm, alone. Back in the forest, the wind grew louder. Clara wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stop shaking. The man groaned. It was faint, but there. She leaned closer. His eyes opened, just a sliver. "Don't talk," Clara said quickly. "You're hurt, but help's coming." "Who are you?" His voice was gravel. "I'm Clara. That's my sister Ivy. And the dog, he's Rusty." He blinked at the dog. "Good dog," he murmured. Then his eyes slid closed again. Ivy returned and knelt beside Clara, both girls now huddled close to Rusty for warmth. The snow had begun to layer over them. "Is he going to die?" Ivy whispered. "No," Clara said. "Not if we stay." Rusty shifted slightly, laying his head on the officer's boot. His breath came slow, steam rising from his nostrils, and when he closed his eyes it was not from rest but watchfulness. The hum of distant sirens was faint at first, almost drowned out by the groan of wind through the frozen pines. But Clara heard it, sharp and clear, and so did Ivy. They turned toward the sound, eyes wide with a mixture of relief and fear. Rusty raised his head, ears alert, tail giving a weak thump against the snow. The world under the trees remained otherwise still, as if the forest itself had paused to see what would happen next. Through the trees came the crunch of heavy boots and the flicker of red and blue lights dancing off white snow. Deputy Caleb Reed was the first on foot, a thick-set man in his late 40s with a black knit cap pulled down low and a parka zipped up to his nose. His breath fogged in front of his wide eyes as he stumbled upon the scene. "Sweet Lord," he murmured, immediately kneeling beside the girls. Caleb was a career deputy, the kind who knew everyone's birthday and still brought coffee to the mayor's office every Monday. He had a gruff demeanor but a deep compassion for kids. He and his wife had lost their only child to illness 5 winters ago, a grief that never quite left his tired face. "Officer Holloway," he whispered, recognizing the man in the snow. "We got you." He gently moved Clara aside. "You girls, you did good. Just hold tight now." More figures followed. 2 paramedics and another officer named Sean Choi, a lean, quick-moving man in his early 30s with a clean-cut look and steady hands. Together, they secured Holloway to a stretcher, working quickly despite the snow's resistance. His breathing was shallow but present, and one paramedic, a stout woman with short blonde hair named Marla Quinlan, murmured updates softly as she worked. "BP's low, temp dropping, but he's holding on." Rusty tried to follow the stretcher as it was carried through the forest, but one of the officers gently held him back. "Easy, boy. We got him now." The dog whined low in his throat, paced in a small circle, then sat beside Clara and Ivy again, refusing to leave them. As the team retreated through the narrow path carved in the snow, a new figure arrived, slower, more deliberate. Detective Miriam Sloan emerged from the edge of the trail wearing a long dark coat dusted with snow, boots laced high, and her thick salt and pepper curls tucked beneath a wool beret. She was tall and lean, with sharp gray eyes that missed nothing. Her face was striking, not beautiful in the conventional sense, but memorable, with lines that suggested intelligence and restraint, a woman shaped by what she'd seen more than what she'd said. Miriam had transferred back to Cedar Hollow only a year ago, after nearly 2 decades working organized crime cases in Seattle. She never talked much about why she left. Some said it was burnout. Others whispered it had to do with a partner gone missing on her watch. Whatever the truth, Miriam had returned quieter, more inward, but just as precise. Now she crouched where Ben Holloway had lain and surveyed the area with slow, practiced eyes. The snow had preserved more than just blood. It revealed tire tracks, irregular boot prints, and the faint outline of something heavy dragged across the ground. She pulled out her notebook, made quick sketches, then took out her phone and snapped several photos. Behind her, Loretta Bellamy appeared through the trees, out of breath, cheeks flushed from running and the cold. She wore a faded green coat that hung slightly loose, and her boots were dusted with snow. Her eyes locked first on her daughters, then on the stretcher being carried away. Clara stood, her hands trembling at her sides. "Mom." Loretta ran to them, kneeling and pulling both girls into her arms. "Oh my God," she whispered, pressing her lips to their foreheads. "You're safe. You're okay." Her breath hitched as tears streaked down her cheeks, freezing slightly in the corners. Miriam turned at the sound of her voice. Their eyes met. "Loretta?" Miriam said quietly. "Miriam." Loretta stood slowly, still holding one of her daughter's hands. "It's been a long time." They hadn't seen each other since high school. Back then, Miriam had been the quiet one who always offered Loretta a seat beside her when others wouldn't. The one who had quietly called for help the night Loretta showed up at school with a bruise shaped like a doorknob. Loretta had never forgotten that. Miriam gave her a small nod. "You have brave kids." "It runs in the family," Loretta replied, voice thick with emotion. The snow began to fall again gently this time. Miriam stepped aside, gesturing toward the trail. "We need to get them warm. We'll talk soon." As the officers escorted the family back toward the road, Rusty remained close behind, his limp more pronounced now from exhaustion. Caleb noticed and bent down. "He needs to be checked too. That dog looks like he's been holding the world on his back." "His name's Rusty," Ivy said softly. Caleb smiled. "Well, Rusty's a hero today." As they neared the ambulance, lights blurred in the snow and engine noise filled the air. Clara looked back once, her eyes lingering on the red-stained snow beneath the trees. Rusty pressed his nose into her hand. Ben Holloway awoke to the faint buzz of fluorescent lights overhead and the soft hiss of an oxygen line beside his head. The hospital room was small, its walls painted a sterile beige and the window framed with frost. He could see the early morning light outside, pale and diffused through a layer of ice crystals. His chest ached and his side throbbed with each breath, but the pain was distant, muted, like a memory. It was the cold he remembered most. Not just physical, but the kind of cold that sank into your ribs and made you question whether you'd wake up at all. A nurse moved quietly near the foot of his bed. Her name tag read, Rachel Kirkland, mid-30s, with a neat blonde ponytail and soft eyes that suggested both competence and fatigue. She had been working doubles for 3 straight days, short-staffed due to a flu outbreak. Still, she greeted Ben with a warm smile when she saw him stir. "Morning, Officer Holloway. You've got the whole station worried." Ben's throat was dry. "Water?" Rachel poured a cup, held the straw for him. "You're lucky. Another hour in that cold and we'd be talking frostbite. Or worse." She glanced toward the window. "You were found just in time. Those girls, real heroes." Ben nodded slightly, though his eyes seemed distant. Not long after, the door creaked open and Detective Miriam Sloan entered, holding a small notepad. She wore a dark wool coat, scarf looped neatly at her collar, and her curls still glistened with melting snow. She pulled up a chair beside Ben's bed and studied him with quiet intensity. "You're awake. That's a good start." Ben gave a weak half-smile. "I've had better Saturdays." Miriam didn't smile back. She reached into her coat pocket and retrieved a small Ziploc bag. Inside was a broken, dirt-smeared 2-way radio casing. "You recognize this?" Ben's expression sharpened. "Yeah, I found it 2 days ago near the southern trailhead, buried under some brush. I was tracking illegal timber activity suspected linked to firearm smuggling. Thought it might be a stash point. Then someone ambushed me." Miriam nodded. "We found tire tracks and boot prints. Same kind used by a crew out of Medford we've been watching. The thing is..." She turned the bag over, revealing the back of the device. Scratched and weathered, but still legible, were the initials RH. Ben stared at it. "My father," he said after a beat. "Russell Holloway. That was his unit radio. He carried it up until the day he went missing, 20 years ago, on this land." Miriam leaned back. "You never believed the official report, did you?" Ben's voice was barely above a whisper. "Disappearance during routine patrol. No suspects, no leads. They buried the case because no one wanted to dig deeper, but I did." Rachel the nurse quietly stepped out, sensing the weight in the room. Miriam tapped her pen against the pad. "You were right. And now someone else knows you were getting too close." Ben closed his eyes briefly. "I saw someone that day, before I blacked out. Red flannel, masked. He said something, 'You're just like your old man.' Then everything went dark." Miriam scribbled that down. Meanwhile, back at the Bellamy cabin, the wood stove crackled faintly in the living room. Clara knelt on the rug with colored pencils scattered around her. She was halfway through a drawing of Rusty standing over Officer Holloway, snow swirling around him, the man's coat soaked in red. Her strokes were bold, unflinching, Beside her, Ivy was curled up with a spiral-bound notebook in her lap, tongue between her teeth as she wrote slowly, deliberately. December 14th. Found a man in the woods. Rusty saved him. Clara was brave. I was cold, but I didn't cry. She paused, then added a second line. I think Rusty knew what we couldn't, that something bad was going to happen. Loretta watched from the kitchen, arms crossed, lips tight. She hadn't said much since they returned home the night before, but her eyes never left her daughter's. She walked over quietly and crouched beside Clara. That's him, isn't it? The officer. Clara nodded. I wanted to remember it, before it fades. Loretta picked up the edge of the drawing, her voice rough with feeling. You didn't let him fade. You gave him a chance. Outside the window, snow drifted gently past the glass, piling on the wooden railing of the porch. Ivy taped her journal page to the mantel. Clara placed her drawing next to it. The fireplace flickered, casting long shadows over their small living room filled with patched quilts and secondhand furniture, now graced by two pieces of art that had nothing to do with decoration and everything to do with memory. Back in the hospital, Miriam stood to leave. She glanced once more at Ben. You rest, but when you're stronger, I need you to walk me through everything again. There's something old buried out there, and I'm done letting it stay hidden. Ben's eyes narrowed. We dig it up, all of it. The snow had not stopped for 2 days. It came in waves, thick, wind-blown veils that turned roads into ribbons of white and hushed the town into stillness. Cedar Hollow felt older under the snow, more distant from the world, and in that stillness, restlessness stirred in Clara. She stood by the frosted window of the living room, watching flakes drift past the glass, boots already laced and scarf wound tight. Her drawing still hung above the fireplace, now curled slightly at the corners from the warmth beneath. We need to go back, she whispered. Ivy, curled up on the couch with a book of winter birds, looked up. Why? Clara tightened her scarf. I just want to check something. That place where Rusty was digging, I don't think it was just luck. Outside, Rusty stood near the door, tail low but alert, as if he already knew. His breath clouded in front of him, and the faint scar on his left hind leg twitched with anticipation. His coat had been brushed that morning by Ivy, a rare moment of calm, but now tufts of fur already clumped with static. He gave a soft chuff and pawed the step. Ivy hesitated but closed her book. Just for a little while, she said. They left a note for Loretta on the counter. Back soon, checking on the trail, brought Rusty, love, C and I. The forest welcomed them in the way only winter could, quiet, solemn, and heavy with its own breath. The path they followed was the same one from that terrible day, though now it looked transformed. What had once been loose ground was now packed snow. What had been blood-stained was now pure white. Clara moved ahead with steady steps, her gloved fingers brushing trees as landmarks. Ivy walked just behind, carrying the flashlight, though the sky was still dimly lit. Rusty walked between them, nose to the ground, tail stiff. They passed the red maple, the one where Officer Holloway had bled into the snow. It still stood like a sentinel, branches bare, bark scarred where the stretcher had bumped during the rescue. Rusty paused there, lowered his head, and let out a single low growl. Clara knelt and brushed snow aside with her mittens. A few inches down, the ground gave way, softened by something underneath. Ivy joined her, brushing with gloved hands until the cold bit through the fabric. Then they saw it. A tangle of electrical wiring, blackened and old, with frayed insulation, half buried next to a crumpled, rusted soda can. Clara turned it over. The label was so faded it was barely legible, but it hadn't been there long enough to decay entirely. Someone's been staying out here, she said quietly. Or hiding something. Rusty circled once, then began pawing at a mound a few feet away. Snow flew in bursts. His movements were frantic, as if something urgent pushed him forward. Then came the soft clink, the sound of metal against claw. Clara and Ivy rushed over as Rusty uncovered a small two-way radio half swallowed by frozen dirt. Clara picked it up. The casing was cracked and the buttons worn. On the back, carved with something sharp but steady, were 2 letters, W-H. Ivy gasped. Is that? Clara nodded. It has to be. Ben's dad, Russell Holloway. Rusty sat down beside the Discovery, his body still and his breath steady. He looked at Clara, not for instruction, but as if to say, You were right to come." Back at the cabin, Loretta was bent over a pile of unopened mail stacked on the kitchen table. She wore a faded blue flannel robe over her thermal layers, hair pulled into a frizzy bun, eyes dull with fatigue. The girls were gone longer than she liked, and the storm outside didn't help her nerves. She picked up the most recent envelope, no return address, just a stamp and her name in uneven print. Inside was a delinquency notice, final warning, overdue payment, utilities scheduled for suspension. Her heart sank. She reached for the phone. Her hand hovered over the receiver, then dropped. Instead, she stood, walked to the pantry, and pulled out the last 2 bags of flour. The oven was unreliable at best. The dial was half broken, and it took 20 minutes just to light. But she did it anyway, lit it with a match, adjusted the tray, and began kneading dough. If she couldn't stop the storm outside or the debt closing in, she could still bake something warm for when her girls returned. Meanwhile, Clara slid the radio into her coat pocket and whispered, "Let's go home." But before they turned back, Ivy pointed at a tree just beyond the grove. Nailed into the trunk was a weathered piece of plywood, splintered at the edges, with words barely legible beneath the peeling paint. "Keep out. Private land." "Someone didn't want people here," Ivy said. "Or didn't want something found," Clara added. As they walked away, Rusty lingered. He sniffed the air, ears flicking, then turned and trotted after them, snow crunching beneath his paws. By the time Clara, Ivy, and Rusty stepped back into town, the wind had shifted. What had been a quiet snowfall turned sharp, slicing sideways like knives of ice. The air felt heavier, thick with the scent of pine and something more primal and urgency that made even the birds silent. As the girls wiped their boots at the threshold of the cabin, Loretta noticed immediately. The snow on their shoulders wasn't soft. It clung like ash. "Where have you been?" Loretta's voice cracked with panic more than anger. "I left for flour and came back to an empty house." Clara didn't answer at first. She carefully pulled the radio from her coat pocket and set it on the counter. "We found this, in the woods." Loretta's eyes flicked from the device to her daughter's. "You went back." She swallowed, trying to control the shaking in her hands. "There's a blizzard warning, Clara." "We had to," Ivy said softly. "Rusty let us." But Loretta was already moving to the window. The wind had grown louder, rattling the pane like fists on glass. Fat flakes hurled themselves against the roof, and the sky had turned a sickly silver. Her breath fogged the window as she peered into the storm. "This isn't a warning anymore. This is it." She turned, grabbed the phone, and dialed without hesitation. "Detective Sloan, it's Loretta. The girls found something. A radio with WH carved in it, but that's not all. Someone's been out there, watching. We need help." On the other end, Miriam Sloan was already standing. At the precinct, most desks were empty, officers either snowed in or deployed along back roads to assist stranded drivers. Miriam wore her usual long black coat, her silver-streaked hair pinned back with a simple clip, and her badge tucked beneath a wool scarf. She moved with urgency, slipping her notepad into her inside pocket as she motioned to the only officer still seated, Deputy Luis Romero. Luis was a short, broad-shouldered man in his early 30s, with thick eyebrows and dark eyes that always seemed 2 thoughts ahead. He'd grown up in southern Arizona and never quite got used to the Oregon winters, but he had a quiet loyalty that Miriam had learned to trust. "I need you at the southern trailhead," she said. "I'll head to the Bellamy place. Bring a thermal scope if we've got one." As Miriam stepped outside, the wind hit her full in the face. The snow came sideways, blinding, and the roads were a glass maze. Her headlights barely cut through the curtain of white as she steered the old SUV through the back trails. Her fingers tightened around the wheel when she saw another set of lights flicker in the mirror, someone else following the same road. It was Ben Holloway, face pale but determined, one hand tight around the steering wheel, the other clutching a scarf around his neck. He shouldn't have been out of the hospital. His stitches were barely holding, and he hadn't walked more than a few feet unaided since the incident. But he wasn't about to let someone else finish what his father had started. Back at the cabin, Loretta was pacing. The girls had been changed into dry clothes, wrapped in quilts, and Rusty lay beside the door like a sentry, eyes half-lidded but ears twitching at every creak. Then came the flicker of headlights in the distance, 2 pairs, piercing the snow like daggers. Loretta's shoulders dropped in relief. But something else happened then. Rusty stood. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just moved with tense purpose to the door and pressed his nose to the crack, his body rigid. And Clara knew. He wants to go back. Ivy stood too, grabbing the flashlight. We can't leave someone out there. Loretta turned from the window. No, absolutely not. But the door was already open, and Rusty was already gone. Clara hesitated only a second. We'll follow him, but stay just inside the edge of the trees. We'll be careful, I promise. Loretta wanted to scream, but the wind stole the words from her lips. The girls were already chasing the dark shape of Rusty bounding into the snow-drenched woods. 15 minutes later, they reached the clearing again, the red maple's silhouette barely visible through the blowing storm. That's when they saw them. Two figures hunched in the shadows near the old plywood warning sign. One held a flashlight, the other had something longer metal, maybe a pipe or a crowbar. Their voices were muffled by the storm, but the words "girls" and "saw something" cut through the white noise like a blade. Clara grabbed Ivy's hand and ducked behind a tree. Her breath steamed in panic. Rusty snarled. The sound tore through the silence, primal and low, more like a wild thing than a dog. The men turned. "There!" one shouted. What happened next blurred. Rusty launched forward, catching the first man's arm with his teeth. The flashlight flew, spinning light across the snow. The second man swung hard, and Clara saw the metal rod arc through the air, striking Rusty across his ribs. The crack was loud. Ivy screamed, but Rusty didn't fall. He spun, snarled, and lunged again, pushing both men backward into deeper woods. His growls echoed, followed by the sounds of boots crunching and curses fading into the distance. Clara held Ivy tightly. Don't move. Stay low. Then another light appeared through the fog, brighter, steady. A vehicle. A horn. Voices. Ben Holloway stumbled out first, a flashlight in one hand and a sidearm in the other. Miriam followed close behind, her voice calm but sharp. "Girls," she called, "are you safe?" Clara stood. "They went that way. Rusty chased them." Ben's face paled. "Where's the dog now?" The wind had died down, but the damage had been done. Snow coated the back roads like spilled plaster, thick and heavy, and the tree limbs along Hollow Ridge Trail sagged with ice. The SUV's tires crunched steadily toward the lights of the Cedar Hollow Animal Clinic, a small, cedar-sided building tucked between two darkened hardware stores on Main Street. Inside the back seat, wrapped in an old army blanket, Rusty lay limp, his chest rising shallowly, a dark stain spreading near his ribcage. Ben Holloway sat beside him, one hand pressed gently over the dog's side to hold the gauze in place. He had refused to sit up front. Miriam drove, her knuckles pale on the steering wheel, headlights bouncing off snowbanks. "We're almost there," she muttered. Clara sat in the middle, eyes wide and unblinking. Her gloved hand rested on Rusty's paw. Ivy leaned against her sister's side, tears frozen on her lashes. "Don't die," she whispered. "You can't." The clinic door opened before they even parked. A petite woman in her early 40s, with chestnut-brown hair pulled into a sleek ponytail and wire-rimmed glasses perched at the edge of her nose, waved them in. This was Dr. Martha Liu, the town's only veterinarian. Precise and no-nonsense, she was known for her efficiency and a quiet sternness that masked a deep love for animals. She wore dark scrubs, a quilted vest, and boots dusted with hay from the livestock barn behind the clinic. "Get him on the table," she said the moment Ben entered carrying Rusty. "Back room. I'll need pressure, fluids, and morphine low dose." Her assistant, Jamie Tran, a college-aged vet tech with streaks of blue in her short black hair, followed with a tray of instruments, already gloved and focused. Clara and Ivy hovered by the door. Ben laid Rusty down and stepped back, his breath shallow, the effort clearly costing him. He leaned against the wall. Martha peeled back the gauze, her brows furrowed. "Blunt trauma to the ribs, likely a fractured intercostal artery. He's lost a lot." "Can he make it?" Clara asked. Martha didn't look up. "If he wants to." Ben's voice was quiet. "He does." For the next 20 minutes, no one spoke. Martha moved with speed and care, suturing, cleaning, whispering something now and then to Jamie. The room smelled of antiseptic and snow-melted fur. The sound of the heart monitor beeped soft and steady. Outside the clinic, Miriam leaned against the hood of her SUV, arms crossed, watching the snow fall lightly again. It was the kind of quiet snow that seemed to forgive, not bury. She pulled out her phone and looked at the photo she'd taken earlier, the initials WH on the radio the girls had found. Her father had once told her, "Some things aren't buried by time, they're buried by silence." Inside, Clara approached the edge of the table. Rusty's breathing was slower now, but rhythmic. He opened one eye. Clara bent close and whispered, "You knew. You knew he was still alive. You knew what we didn't." Ben, still leaning on the wall, wiped his eyes roughly with the back of his sleeve. "I owe you everything," he said hoarsely. "All of you. Especially Rusty," Ivy added, her voice tiny. Jamie looked up from the chart. "He'll need to rest. For days. No sudden movement. But he's stable." Dr. Liu nodded, removing her gloves. "He shouldn't be alive," she said. "But dogs like him, they survive off something more than just organs and blood. That dog runs on heart." The storm had passed by morning. At the Bellamy cabin, the air still held a chill, but something had changed. Loretta, still in her wool cardigan, stood at the end of the driveway, hammering a wooden sign into the snowbank. It read, "Bread from a cold kitchen, warmth for tired souls." The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and yeast. The oven was temperamental, sometimes heating, sometimes not, but it was enough. Enough to bake small loaves of sourdough and oat bread. She lined them along the windowsill, wrapping them in brown paper and twine. The first to stop by was Mr. Elder, a retired postman with a gray beard and a limp from an old hip surgery. He handed over a bundle of chopped wood with one hand and took 2 loaves with the other. "Heard what your girls did," he said. "Town's talking. Brave little things." An hour later, Maria Owens, the widowed school librarian, brought a box of canned goods and a plastic bag full of batteries. "Take what you need," she said, "and keep baking." One man showed up with a roll of copper wiring and a toolbox. "Name's Joe. I can fix that stove coil if you've got coffee." By noon, the kitchen glowed not from the oven, but from the people. Loretta hadn't planned to open a bakery. She hadn't planned to be a mother of heroes either. But somehow, both had happened. That afternoon, Miriam stopped by. She didn't say much, just dropped off a manila envelope full of photos, maps, and the radio casing from the woods. "When you're ready to talk about it," she said to Ben, who now sat beside Rusty's bed at the clinic, "we'll finish what your father started." The snow was still there, but different. What once fell in silence now melted in rivulets dripping from rooftops, seeping into earth, and trickling down the gutters of Cedar Hollow. The bitter stillness had softened, and for the first time in weeks, sunlight threaded gently through the pine trees. The town breathed again. It had been 1 month since the night of the storm. Outside the Cedar Hollow Elementary, a long banner flapped gently above the entrance, hand-painted in bold colors by the 5th grade art club. "Honoring our heroes, small boots, big hearts." Folding chairs lined the multi-purpose room, transformed for the day into a town hall of sorts. A projector sat on a cart in the corner, its bulb humming, ready to play clips recorded from local news coverage. The room was filled with familiar faces. Mayor Glenn Rickard, a silver-haired man in his early 60s with a thick mustache and ever-present beige scarf, stood by the podium straightening index cards. He had a dry wit and a fondness for long speeches, but today he promised to keep it short by small-town standards. Clara and Ivy Bellamy sat near the front, dressed in matching maroon sweaters over collared shirts, their hair brushed and pinned with small snowflake barrettes gifted by Ms. Owens from the library. Rusty sat between them, his coat groomed, his posture regal despite the bandaged scar along his ribs. Around his neck hung a blue velvet ribbon, the kind usually reserved for county fair champions, to which a gleaming medal had been clipped, K9 Civilian Hero Award. Loretta sat behind them, wearing a wool coat mended 3 times over and a pair of leather gloves passed down from her grandmother. In her lap, she clutched a warm paper bag of cinnamon rolls thank-you gifts for after the ceremony. Her eyes rarely left her daughters or the dog they now considered family. Ben Holloway stood just off stage. His face had regained its color, though the scar on his temple had yet to fade. He wore his officer uniform, crisp and pressed, with the sleeves rolled to his elbows and his badge freshly polished. He moved with a slight limp, but stood tall. Miriam Sloane leaned against the side wall, arms folded. No badge today, just a black blazer over a dark turtleneck and her usual quiet watchfulness. Tucked beneath her arm was a small cassette tape in a plastic case worn soft at the edges. When Mayor Rickard finally took the mic, his voice rang clear. Sometimes the strongest guardians in our towns don't stand 6 feet tall or wear guns. Sometimes they walk on 4 legs, and they come when no one else does. Laughter and applause broke the air. He recounted the story of the girls finding Officer Holloway, the discovery of evidence buried under the snow, the night of the storm, and Rusty's fierce protection. Then, turning toward Ben, he gestured him to the podium. Ben cleared his throat, nerves flickering behind his steady gaze. "I'm not a man who usually talks in front of crowds," he began. "But I'll say this. I've worn this uniform for over 10 years, and I've served this town the best way I know how. But a few weeks ago, I wasn't the one who answered the call. 2 girls did, a dog did, and because of that, I'm still here." He paused, voice thickening. "I didn't just get pulled out of the woods. I was pulled back from giving up. I was handed back my life. And I was handed back a mystery I thought I'd buried." He looked down at Rusty, who gave a single wag of his tail. Sometimes, the best detectives don't talk. They just know. After the ceremony, people milled about, sipping cider from paper cups and taking photos. Ivy leaned toward Clara and whispered, "I think we saved more than one person." Clara didn't speak. She just nodded, eyes locked on Rusty, who lay at her feet with his head resting on his paws, tail thumping against the floor now and then. He was at peace in a way he hadn't been since the day they found Ben in the snow. Later that afternoon, Miriam visited Ben at his house just outside town. His home was modest, set behind an old fence, with a porch that creaked even without footsteps. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. He'd left the door open. On the kitchen table, beside a half-drunk cup of coffee, she placed the cassette tape. "I had to dig through 20 years of misfiled evidence and mislabeled boxes," she said. "But I found it." Ben turned the tape over in his hands. Faded marker across the label read, "R. Holloway, Shift Logs, March '04. His throat tightened. "You think there's something on here?" "I think your father knew more than anyone wanted him to." Ben fetched an old cassette player from a drawer, plugged it in, and clicked it on. The tape clicked, word, static, then a voice grainy but clear. "This is Russell Holloway logging Patrol Route 2, saw smoke rising near the southern tree line, followed it to a clearing unmarked vehicle, license plate obscured, possibly military issue, approached on foot, heard voices, didn't recognize dialect, logging equipment, but that's not all they're cutting." Ben closed his eyes, pressing his fingertips to his temples. Miriam didn't say anything. She just let the tape play, filling the room with the voice of a man who had walked the same woods, seen the same shadows, and never returned. That evening, back at the Bellamy house, the kitchen was warm again. The oven had been fixed thanks to Mr. Joe, who now came by weekly with bolts and bolts of old wires, and the smell of fresh bread floated through the air. Loretta packed rolls into paper bags, marking each one with hand-drawn stars. Rusty lay in his usual spot near the table, eyes half closed, legs twitching in a dream. The girls sat cross-legged beside him, flipping through a scrapbook Ivy had started. News clippings, drawings, and a photo someone had taken of Rusty standing tall at the ceremony, metal gleaming in the winter sun. Outside the window, the last of the snow dripped from the edge of the roof. The sky above Cedar Hollow had turned a soft amber, and the wind no longer howled, it hummed. Sometimes the loudest miracles come wrapped in silence. In a snowy forest, it wasn't a rescue team or a searchlight that saved Officer Ben Holloway. It was 2 little girls, a mother who never stopped believing, and a scarred old dog named Rusty, who followed a whisper in the wind. This story reminds us that God's grace doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes, he sends angels in the shape of children, or a German shepherd with a limp and a heart full of courage. When the world grows cold, when life feels buried under storms and silence, remember, love still finds a way. And sometimes, just showing up for someone is the miracle they've been praying for. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to thank God for second chances. Share this with someone who needs a little light in their winter. Comment Amen if you believe dogs can be angels and children can be heroes. Subscribe to hear more true stories of faith, love, and courage. May God bless you and protect your family just like he protected Rusty and those 2 brave sisters.